Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of the Hansi Comprehensive Exam Podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Oden. My co-host, Hannah Robinson, couldn't make it in today, but I asked my wonderful and hilarious wife, Bonnie, to help me with the hosting duties. My guest this week is an old friend of mine, Susan Klebba, someone I met while I was in undergrad at the University of Idaho. She currently works at a law firm in Salt Lake City as an assistant to an immigration attorney, and she handles paperwork and other tasks for people trying to get visas to come into the United States. She came down to Las Vegas to visit us over the long weekend, and I asked her to come on the podcast to talk about her job and to get her insights on some recent events. Today's episode is sponsored by Scissors. When you need a piece of paper cleanly cut into several pieces of paper, trust Scissors. When you need to open clamshell packaging and only want 2 or 3 deep cuts on your delicate fingers, trust Scissors. When burglars break into your home and take your wife hostage and you're regretting not buying that .44 at the gun show last weekend, trust Scissors for all your cutting, slicing, and self-defense needs. I'm here today with my friend Susan, and we go way back, and I'm also here today with my wife Bonnie, who is taking over the co-hosting duties today.
What's up, guys?
So we're going to be talking about what you like to do for a living. Go ahead and say hello to our beautiful audience.
Hello, beautiful audience.
Yeah, perfect. See, you're already pandering. It's perfect. So, Susan Klebba, what do you do? What is that you do for a job?
I work in immigration law, so I help to bring people who have work visas here, or who are applying for work visas. So usually they're from China or India. We do a lot of technology, engineering-based visas, and basically we're writing to the government telling them this person is qualified to do this job requires someone who has a degree, and yeah, we bring them over. Sometimes we do perm residence, like getting people green cards so that they can, proving that there aren't any American workers out there basically who can take the job, and we do a few family-based cases, but those are rarer.
Okay, that's really cool. So your job then, what do you do at the firm that you work at?
So basically I do some fact checking, like seeing where people have gone to universities, seeing their courses, making sure they have the correct degree, how long they've been in the United States, when they've come in, their passports. And I do a lot of argumentative writing. I write support letters that basically the companies sign, saying, you know, what the position requires, what the company does, why this person is a good fit for the position. And a lot of compiling documentation and argumentative writing is basically what I do.
Do you feel like you really have to fight for these people, or is it generally pretty easy to get them the right paperwork?
Definitely depends on the visa. We do a lot of H-1Bs, which are just 3-year visas, so those are pretty easy. If it's a perm residence or kind of like some of the family-based cases, those you have to really argue on. Or their L visas are harder too, because you have to show that that person has specialized knowledge that's like more specialized than anyone in this country could have. So those are challenging.
Who are you writing these letters to? Are you writing them to companies that are potentially going to employ them?
United States Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Okay.
So the government.
Okay, so do you feel like you encounter a lot of, or more resistance towards certain groups of people, or do you feel like it's generally all the same as far as how difficult it is to convince the government to let these people stay?
It is harder to bring in people from Russia, countries that we have kind of tense relationships with.
Oh, I see.
It's also harder to bring in people who their specialized knowledge is more nebulous. So like people who are coming in to work marketing, who aren't coming in to work something like engineering or software. It's a lot harder to argue that their knowledge is unique and specialized, and that's why we can bring them in.
Right, because they can only work here if we don't have an American doing that job.
Right, or even for a lot of the visas, like the H-1Bs, require specialized knowledge, specialized workers. And when you have someone in marketing, it's like, well, is that marketing degree really that unique? You know, like, could they have got a communications degree or a journalism degree and still do the same thing? And usually it depends on the position.
So you do a lot of research, you do a lot of writing, obviously, but you're not a paralegal, right?
Correct, yeah.
So what is your position called?
I'm the project assistant, immigration project assistant. So I do elements of both what a paralegal would do, and I do some elements of what a secretary would do, like copying or logging information about these people into our system.
And you work for an attorney, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yep.
and he works in a firm, and they handle just immigration cases or like all kinds of stuff?
The firm is huge, so we handle everything like corporate, IP law, immigration, natural resources law. the immigration department is very small. I'm one of 3 people in it. So.
And you work in Salt Lake City.
Correct.
Right. And do you find that where you work in the United States influences the kind of work that you do?
I don't think to a significant degree. I mean, we do a lot of work for more companies that are local. The firm has offices throughout the West. So sometimes, another client will engage the firm for a different matter, and then they'll be like, oh, by the way, like, we have this immigrant worker we want to hire, and then they'll kind of shift them over to us. So anything that gets funneled in from the other offices or anyone in Salt Lake who needs immigration help. Well, I mean, not anyone, but a lot of the people we do are from Salt Lake or around there.
I ask because I think that if you worked in a different part of the country, like if you worked in southern Arizona or Texas or Florida.
Or Las Vegas, for instance.
Or Las Vegas or Alaska, right, you would be working with different groups of people. And I'm wondering then, is the kind of law that is being practiced, the kind of visas that you're trying to get, they're obviously biased towards educated people who are probably upper class where they probably come from, right? They've been able to secure degrees. Do you think that affects the kinds of people that are coming into the country?
I guess I'm a bit confused what you're asking, because I think certainly there are lots of people coming into Salt Lake who are illegal immigrants, and just I think our firm doesn't really do that as much because most of our clients are corporate clients who are coming in for litigation or that kind of thing.
Right, but you're not helping like Mexican farm workers coming across the border or something. You're helping a very specific subset of immigrants.
And you're questioning whether that's related to Salt Lake as a location?
Right.
Okay. I don't think so. I think it's just the nature of our firm. I mean, there are lots of people in Salt Lake who take other family-based cases that we just don't do as much of.
I can't help but notice also that you can edit this out if you need to.
No, I'm not editing anything, Bonnie.
Well,
I was thinking the same thing.
What I couldn't help but notice is how, so your firm, like Lindsay said, it sounds like it's geared more toward getting these people in who are very educated. You said they're, usually Chinese or Indian, people with high education. I wonder if your firm doesn't deal with cases of, like, for instance, Mexican farm workers. I wonder...
Well, that's just what I'm asking is I think that the place dictates so much about what kind of work you're doing, because there probably aren't a lot of kind of transient agricultural workers who are coming all the way to Salt Lake. Rather, I'm thinking about the people who live in those kind of borderland regions where they might be crossing the border multiple times a year, seeking seasonal work or something like that, and then they might try to get maybe work permits or permanent status or alien status and things like that, like my mom does, but she lives in Idaho, and she's from Australia, so it's a completely different situation, and that's why I was asking. So what drew you to this work? I know in undergrad at the University of Idaho, where we met, you studied anthropology and Spanish. And so what drew you to this line of work?
I also studied English, so I did a lot of writing. I liked argumentative writing. They asked me to submit that as part of applying for the job. But I think what really drew me to it was the international aspect. My mom's from Poland. I've had international conversation partners. Like, I just love talking to people from different countries and understanding multiple perspectives, I guess, to the world around me.
Do you feel like the work you do is doing good? Do you feel like it's enriching? Do you feel fulfilled by it?
I do, yeah. Mm-hmm. We do family-based cases, and I think those are some of the most rewarding ones, like when you try to save someone from being deported, basically. Mm-hmm. And, in terms of the other people, like, that's their life, like bringing them into this country, that's like the ultimate goal of their life is to move to this better place and, create a new life for their family. So yeah, they are educated upper class people a lot, but, to get to America and out of India in some cases is like their life aspiration, and we help with that.
Mm-hmm. Just personally, what's your thought on immigration into the United States? Do you think anybody that wants to live here should be allowed to live here?
I think it's tough because maybe I'm just hesitant to speak in absolutes, but...
Listen, every person in the entire world should live in America.
But, I do think borders are really arbitrarily drawn. Mm-hmm. Like, the border for California and Texas literally crossed thousands of, maybe more than thousands, I don't know the number, of people who were Mexican previously. Right. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly the border moved and they were American, and we're just like, well, this is America, but, really it wasn't. And so I mean, certainly I think that we're way too strict with Mexican immigration, like saying, you know, these people want to work, they're going to take our jobs. Well, like, if they can get a job, they can't speak the language, they don't have connections, like, it's incredibly difficult.
Well, the way I see it, if you're competing for a job with someone who doesn't even speak English as a first language, if they do better than you in an interview, I think they deserve it. I don't see why people get this idea that anyone is stealing a job. I mean, you had to interview for that job just like anyone else. It's no different than competing with another American for a job, at least in my opinion.
Exactly.
I'm sure there are people who would disagree.
What people don't understand is that if every undocumented immigrant was deported tomorrow, the economies of several southern states would absolutely collapse. Mm-hmm. They're completely dependent on immigrant labor.
Well, it's happened before. They literally had fruit rotting on the vines. The entire southern half of the United States, the agriculture industry pretty much collapsed when they tightened up on border regulations, because there are jobs that Americans feel are below them. So Americans won't do those jobs. It's hard to find Americans who are willing to go out and work and do that.
Well, and is this not a kind of criticism of the capitalist system that exists here? Mm-hmm. Is that there are American employers who are not willing to pay the wages that Americans are asking for, so Americans choose not to do those jobs. They don't engage in that system. And what's left over is people who are willing to do the jobs, who are paid often less than minimum wage and things, and these are people who are who have a level of desperation that is higher than most Americans.
Well, let me just kind of reiterate an observation also about that. You know, I feel like many of the people that feel we should have stricter regulations on immigration, a lot of them are very conservative, sort of capitalistic mindsets, which I think is really kind of contradictory, because on the one hand, it feels like the people who are the most in favor of capitalism are the same ones making the argument, basically, that Mexicans are stealing our jobs by essentially providing stronger competition for American workers. I don't ever see how having more competition for a job is going to be bad for that company.
Well, this is the hypocrisy that is not actual hypocrisy, right? It's a part of their ideology to say that we favor the free market system except where it hurts us, right? The free market system supports illegal immigration. That's what they don't want to admit, is that the wages are kept so low by the market that they've established that illegal immigrants are the only people willing to do the jobs. And that's where it fits into their ideology, is that they have a very particular kind of country that they want to want the labor conditions to conform to. They want American workers to work for those terrible wages. But because American workers refuse to, they form this part of the ideology that is against outside workers.
Susan, have you ever had to defend your job to anyone? Have you ever had anyone tell you that you shouldn't be doing what you do and that you shouldn't be in favor of all of these non-Americans trying to get into our country? Have you ever encountered that?
I haven't, actually, and I think in large part that's because a lot of the people we bring over do have degrees and are educated, and so people are like, okay, well, like, it's not the same, I guess, as...
It's the good kind of immigrant.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, too. Because when you think about it, the kind of jobs that are available to people with degrees are rather limited, right? Just the number itself is smaller. And so the competition naturally would be more... it would be more competitive to try and get those jobs. So it's very interesting, then, that people from outside the country, you don't face as much resistance about them because they are educated.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of interesting because, I mean, when we're going through green card applications and we have to make sure there weren't any qualified American workers, like, we have to review and make sure that the recruiters legitimately rejected people. And sometimes there are no American workers applying for these jobs. Like, all of the applications are from international workers.
Even in things like the tech sector
exactly,
or things like that.
Particularly the tech sector.
There's no Americans who apply for them.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, some of them are, but some of these positions literally have no American applicants, and that's just mind-blowing to me.
Do you know, is that a product of our education system, or is that because they don't pay well enough, or what do you think is the cause of that?
I think it might just be the increased demand. I mean, America is, you know, one of the most industrialized countries out there, and, like, we take so much tech, require so much tech, want so much tech that...
We
just the
don't,
demand we have for it is...
We haven't produced enough workers.
Correct.
So we have to import them, right? Yeah. So I know that America has outsourced a lot of jobs overseas, especially factory jobs, and you always hear, you know, you call a call center and it's people in India, right? But that's because of prices. But in this case, we're doing the opposite, which is importing jobs because we don't have enough workers to do them. you have any more questions on this topic? Okay. I think this was like really informative to me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay, let us move on then. Let's move into a more general area here. Who are your biggest influences?
That's really tough. I feel like speaking on a more personal level than a professional level. So I'm going to say my grandma and my dad. They're both two of the hardest working people I've ever met. And my dad does, he always says, like, well, my parents worked way harder than I did. Like, and my dad works an incredible amount. Like, he works in maintenance, so he gets up at, like, 5 in the morning. And, he's back there at 11 at night when a light goes out or something. So.
Mm-hmm.
I always think it's fascinating when you ask people this question because it tells you, it tells me more about you than it does about your grandmother and your dad, because you can learn a lot about somebody by hearing what it is that they appreciate in another person.
Right.
I'm sure there are people that, if you asked who are your influences, they would say, oh, this person because they're very funny, or this person because they're very attractive.
Or I believe the same things that they do.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
exactly. But it shows me by your answer that having a good work ethic is something that's very important to you.
And it tells me, when I wrote this question, I'm asking, like, what are your favorite philosophers? Yeah. Who's a thinker who's really influenced you? That's what I was thinking when I wrote this question. So let's backtrack, like 2 minutes, because I'm definitely keeping that answer in. I think it's really important. I'm thinking, you studied anthropology. Are there particular anthropologists or theorists who have influenced the way that you approached your education and then approached what you've been doing since then?
I feel like my job is different a lot than the focus of my education. I studied Spanish, so certainly I learned about, border problems with Mexico, Spanish itself, Latin America. Oh, I was going to say Darwin was huge. So my sophomore year, I signed up for French because I was 3 classes away from a French minor. I went to like 2 days of French and I was like, I don't want to do another humanities. I can't do this. So I signed up for human evolution because I thought that sounded really interesting. And I guess I didn't know about it. I still think that schools do an extremely cursory job of talking about evolution and you don't get very into it. And so that class kind of like sprung an interest in biological anthropology. That's why I studied anthropology, evolution of humans. I think I should have studied biology, really, because the only part I cared about was the evolution part. Right. I didn't care about the social implications, but...
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So I'm going to ask a personal question here. Feel free to not answer if it's too personal for Lindsay's blog.
He won't edit it out if I do answer it, so...
I just love to compare my experiences to other people's experiences. So as far as I understand, you were raised religious. Is it true? Are you still religious? Are you Catholic?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
So my question for you, because I had a similar experience where I was raised very religious, and I felt like as I learned more about evolution and as I sort of learned all these things, it definitely affected my perception of the world and it changed my beliefs. I'm wondering if you've experienced any of the same thing. As a person and like for your religious beliefs, do you feel like your beliefs have shifted at all since you've studied Darwinism? Because that's something uncommon, I think, I don't think I've ever met another religious person who would say that Darwin was an influence for them.
Well, and tell me if I'm not mistaken, but the Catholic Church has endorsed certain parts of evolution as being compatible with the Bible, right? So in terms of religiosity, you're probably facing less resistance than, say, like your typical American evangelical.
I guess in a broader sense, I'm just asking, to what level do you think your beliefs have shifted since acquiring more education?
I think I certainly started to examine them more and in different ways. But, certainly I haven't shifted religions or anything. I think, I've come close, I think, but in the end I've largely, I understand it better, I think. I've certainly thought about it a lot more, but...
What do you mean by you came close?
There was, when I was in college, I spent a lot of time with the Christian group, and a lot of my friends were from that group, and I started to kind of think about it more, like, and I also studied abroad, and the Catholic Church is completely different in Chile than it is here, so that was kind of eye-opening, like, how is the same religion completely different in this other country, like...
Especially considering you have the same leadership and all these things, that the Catholic Church's hierarchy is supposedly the same in every country.
Exactly, Catholic, universal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
You've got your Pope, and then you got your archbishops and all of that stuff, and they all supposedly follow the same teachings and doctrines, no matter how much they debate and things like that.
Well, and I think a lot of it was similar, but I mean, it's so entrenched in the country there, like in its government, its politics, and more than that, it was just small details. I mean, the hierarchy was the same, the mass was the same, but just the details were kind of what got me, because I'm very detail oriented. That's important to me.
Right.
That's part of why I can like fill out forms for immigrants and get the dates right. But
Yeah. Well, I had a pretty similar experience, or that's something that I noticed also. I know Christianity is a little bit more ambiguous than Catholicism, I think, just by the nature of it.
Well, I mean,
because
you're talking about a
Christianity was
sect,
born from rebellion, virtually. I mean, it was...
Well, that's what they want you to believe.
Well, modern...
it appeals to the American mindset.
Well, what I'm saying is,
you could ask Nietzsche, he'd probably give a different answer, but go on.
Protestant Christianity of the particular brand, or the flavor, if you will, that we have in America was basically born from people, quote-unquote, rebelling against the Catholic Church. So I think...
And the Church of England.
Well, yeah. So I think because Christianity was born from quote-unquote rebellion, I think it's natural that it's going to have more, differences within it. But that's definitely something that I noticed as well, because I experienced so many different brands of Christianity, even in the small town that I grew up in. And it, something funny that I noticed is, because I went to sort of a more conservative type, almost Pentecostal church when I was growing up, and they said New Age, they always use the term New Age Christianity, and I always thought that was funny because it was almost like a dirty word. Like, if you called somebody like a New Age Christian, it's like they weren't really a Christian, and then on the other hand, if you go to a New Age Christian church, they talk about like, oh, the old school Christians who like, the basically the attitude toward them is that they've not evolved mentally and ethically to the same level.
What an excellent term to use too, evolved.
Exactly.
Considering what we're talking about.
Exactly. But that's something that I found really interesting, is that even within one small town with very little diversity, growing up in Spokane, Washington, I saw so many different brands of Christianity that were basically pitted against one another. I was kind of astonished by that too.
And where we live, and where you live, especially in Salt Lake, you've got the Mormons, right? They're one of the newer sects of Christianity, and they have an entirely different take on the doctrines and things like that. So I think I find it really interesting then. You have all of these different, in America, like you said, the church is so different here, but it's also amidst a lot of different social conditions which have raised different kinds of churches. So my mom made me go to some churches, and I never bought it. That was the thing, that I remember being like 9 years old, sitting in church, and listening to the guy talk, and just having so many questions. Just the natural kind of childlike curiosity, things that even at a very young age I didn't think made much sense. And I can remember sitting in the church, and my brother, he's younger than me, so he's not paying attention at all. So I think he has a different experience of religion than I do. But I was old enough to sit in the chair, listen to what the content of the speech was, and still not buy it. And I appreciate my mom taking me to church so that I could experience it for myself and learn something about myself. Because I think that starts this lifelong process of me being very skeptical. My dad's an atheist, but he never pushed it on us, which I think is important. He always thought it was important to let us choose. But when you think about it, I had no choice but to become an atheist because of the way that I was raised. I was not indoctrinated from a young age to believe something, except that believe what you want to believe. But what ends up happening, and my dad and I had this conversation, I said, Dad, you let us choose what religion we were going to be, but we were always going to be atheists. We were always not going to be religious.
I think you're dead wrong on that one. I've known a lot of people that were atheists until they were 30 or 40, and they never grew up with it, and then they converted to Christianity, when they were
But again, that's a different
older.
experience, because I'm not in that part of my life yet. I think that there are different questions that people face at different points of their life as they get older, where religion could mean more or less to them, or that you go through some personal crisis or something like that. But I'm talking about my own personal experience, that there's absolutely no way I was going to be religious because I was always given this skeptical attitude.
Okay, all right, I'll see that. So you're saying it's not because you were never exposed to it, you're saying because of your own mindset and your own skepticism.
If my dad had been a dogmatic preacher type atheist from as long as I can remember, it would have been completely different, because then you get turned off on things like that, right? Then you get turned off about the dogmatism and things. But now he was very open about letting us choose our own religion. But he and I, like I said, he and I had this conversation where I said, Dad, you knew we were never going to be religious, and he said he knew that. He said he knew that, even though he was bringing us up to be open-minded, that very being open-minded prevented us from being religious. And my brother, of course, he's a lot less hardcore about it than I am. Right? Like, I have very strongly held beliefs. I've done the philosophical research and the soul searching and things like that. I think my brother just doesn't care. Right? He's more of an app atheist than I am. Where I certainly have a philosophical distinction where I call myself a weak atheist, but that's philosophical, that says nothing about my drive to be non-religious or something like that.
I could maybe identify as like a very, very weak agnostic. I'm like right on the borderline probably between agnostic and atheist.
Well, that means you're a strong agnostic.
Strong agnostic?
Yeah, because the term weak just means that I don't make a Gnostic claim. I don't say if there is or is not a God. I say there probably is not a God, but I can't prove that there isn't one.
Interesting.
There's strong atheists who do make the Gnostic claim. So a weak atheist and a strong agnostic are extremely closely related.
Okay. Interesting. Well,
now we know.
Yeah. All right. Now we all know each other really well. Okay.
Hey, it's Lindsay here at Intermission. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at ScreaminVegan. Don't forget to like the Handsy Comprehensive Exam Facebook page at facebook.com/Handsy Comprehensive Exam. Email the show, handsycompexam@gmail.com. Be on the lookout for new music tracks for my music project, Disciplinary Boundaries, which you can find on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/disciplinary-boundaries. And of course, follow the Handsy Comprehensive Exam blog at handsycomprehensiveexam.com. Let's get back to the show. We're going to move on to the next section. I call this section Contemporary Topics and Takes.
Contemporary Topics and Takes.
And I've picked out 3 news stories that I would like to talk to. And the first 2 are pretty much related. Of course, what happened a couple weeks ago with the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, where cartoonists were killed for their depictions of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. And then the subsequent backlash from the West, which has claimed things like Je suis Charlie and things like that to claim solidarity with the cartoonists. Now, of course, there's a backlash to the backlash. And this week, there were protests in Niger that left 10 people dead as there were attacks on French buildings perpetrated by Muslims who were carrying signs that say Je suis Muslim, right, as the kind of backhanded version of Je suis Charlie.
Now, just for context, tell us what Je suis means.
It means I am.
Okay.
I think.
Je suis, yeah.
I don't speak good French. That's not really my deal.
Almost French minor.
Yeah, there you go.
You're correct.
So, but the idea is I don't want to talk about the story as it is because I think it's very tragic, of course, and to me, there's not a lot of right answers. I think the answer from the left has been rather stunted because in America, we are such free speech absolutists that we say...
Not only that, but I think there's no way to get around the fact that America, I think, is going to be tainted toward the Muslim religion for a long time. Just
of course.
Because of, I mean, the terrorist attacks are still fresh in our mind. Of course, Muslim radical extremists do not speak for the majority, which unfortunately
Yes.
I feel is something that most people don't understand. They believe every Muslim is a terrorist and every Muslim wants to see all Christians dead. That's not true.
Right.
Like
The Fox News version of Islam.
Well, a good way that I heard it described once is that the Muslim majority feels about terrorists the way that most Christians feel about Westboro Baptist Church.
Right.
But because the more outspoken radicals are the ones that are the loudest, a lot of the time they end up, basically speaking for the majority without the consent of the majority.
Right.
Well,
so to speak.
And Islamic terrorist groups have killed more Muslims than they have, Western people or Americans or anything. And nobody ever pays attention to that
Right.
fact.
Well, not to mention, white people in general, like white Christians coming over and committing mass genocide against the Native Americans was far more devastating to another population than anything that the Middle East could ever do to America.
Well, and we forget that the
We
very...
like to take this false moral high ground, but
Right.
we're very,
That's what
very...
it is.
We're
Correct.
very selectively blind to our own history.
Right.
And we're very
Well, here's the
quick
thing. The very week that the attacks happened in Paris, American planes killed a bunch of civilians. Mm-hmm. And we don't... Where's the coverage of that? Where's the outrage? Where's the Je suis civilians?
Exactly.
Well,
Right?
and
Why
during-
can't we do that?
And during the same time frame, the massacres in Nigeria occurred. Like, more than 2,500 people died. And what got news? The people in Nigeria or the Western white people?
Right. And that's exactly what I want to talk about, is this story. I don't want to talk about the story specifically. I want to talk about the way that the story is framed, is that it's a battle between two incommensurate views of the world, right? We have the West, we have liberalism, we have free speech, we have freedom of the press, we have freedom of expression, and we're absolutists about these things. Right, and the quote that's been passed around over and over and over, attributed to Voltaire, he never even said it, but I may not agree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death to defend it, to defend your right to say it, right? That's been passed around so many times, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that on Facebook and Twitter. What people don't get is that the way this story is framed is to say this is an East versus West problem. These people, these terrorists, they are described as barbarians, they are uncivilized. It's not about that. It's not about two worldviews that don't agree with each other. But that's how it's being framed, to say that the West is better because we have free speech.
I just think it's an interesting cultural phenomenon, the way that America seems to worship freedom as an absolute value. And a lot of people say, like, oh, we want all of the freedom, but no one seems to understand that absolute freedom is anarchy. If absolute freedom activists basically got their way in this country, we would have no government, we would have no laws, we would live in basically a vigilante justice state with absolute anarchy. I don't think anybody understands that that's basically what they're advocating when they say that they want absolute freedom. I don't think anybody actually understands what they.
Well, and I think about who benefits.
You have to wonder, like, where you should draw the line of how much freedom is good and how much freedom is too much freedom.
No, remember, we claim solidarity with Charlie Hebdo because we agree with them, right? I don't. Their depictions of Muhammad were clearly racist. Clearly racist. I think it's bad satire. I know this is the criticism we get all the time.
Not just racist, but incendiary.
Well, it's bad. It's not good satire. Punching down is not good satire. Remember, depictions of Muhammad as a barbarous, uncivilized, violent character benefit the white majority of France and their ongoing tensions with their Muslim minority, right?
Right.
Punching down is not good satire. The only thing that we should be claiming solidarity with Charlie Hebdo is to say that free speech is important. Things that call themselves satire are important, right? But we believe that because we're from the West. And you wanted to say something, please.
Yeah, I do. Bonnie was talking about how you can have too much freedom. And I think, obviously our freedom of speech has bounds. Like, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right, that's the example.
Right, and I think that this is one of those cases where possibly it should have bounds. Because if it had been, a Jewish minority that was depicted on there would have been an outrage. There would have been lawsuits.
I'm so glad you said that. Because if we did the same thing in this country...
black people.
Towards black people. Exactly. Al Sharpton would be on the TV saying, we have to shut this paper down. But it's the Prophet Muhammad.
And Middle Eastern Muslims are the black people of France.
Exactly.
That's who they are in French society.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
And I think that the white French majority probably feels very threatened. They probably feel the same way hopefully not most, but many Americans feel about Mexican immigrants. They're basically they're an unfamiliar looking type of people with a different language coming in, competing for jobs.
Yeah, it's the same.
Competing for religion. Competing for
they
political
compete
power
against
in the country.
Algerians,
as any good democracy should. But
alas. because France colonized Algeria. There's many parallels to how America colonized Mexico. And of course, there are opportunities that are available to Algerians and French Algerians, in the same way that there are opportunities available to Mexicans from the southern United States, right? So it should be no surprise that there are many Muslims who live in France, but they can't tolerate that, right? Because, like you said, they're outside, they're strange, they're foreign, they don't speak the language, they have weird customs, they have weird beliefs. Why do you think the French majority banned the headscarf for Muslim girls in schools?
Politics of the Veil.
Politics, exactly. Joan Scott. That's my book. That's on my comps list. I loved that book, and I love Joan Scott. I'm an absolute shill for Joan Scott. But the point that I'm trying to make is to say that we should stop framing this as East versus West. It's not about that. It's about who benefits from this kind of media portrayal of Charlie Hebdo as the free speech absolutists. Who benefits from that? It's the white people in power. It's to say that we agree with them, we will defend them, but we can't defend other things, other parts of our society that are anathema to free speech like that. We don't defend the KKK, but the idea is that we rail against racism often, right? In this country, we have very fraught racial relations. Some people want to claim reverse racism, whatever. That's uncomplicated. Or I should say, it's complicated in the uncomplicated sense. This story is complicated because we ideologically agree with them.
Ideologically, but not methodically.
Right. Well,
I don't want anyone listening to this
agree with them.
podcast to be confused and think that I'm defending anyone who would kidnap and murder a bunch of cartoonists to prove a point.
Yeah, that's
Believe
not the
me,
point.
I don't think that's the right way to go about it. But ideologically, I understand the perspective, and I feel that like everyone who hears about the story and everyone who is, updating their Facebook status to Je suis Charlie, they want to turn the situation into a much more black and white political matter than it actually is. Just like humans want to do with everything, we want to believe everything is neat and either absolutely right or absolutely wrong, when really it's a lot more complicated.
How many Americans were defending Charlie Hebdo before the attacks?
Zero.
Zero. Nobody.
Right.
Until it became on our radar, part of our ideological warfare.
And I think a lot of the reason why it is even on our radar and why it's being televised so much and why it's being built up in the media is because it's helping to reinforce the American belief that Muslims are barbaric. And that's what we like to believe. That's what we're comfortable believing. And I think it's going to take a long time before our country changes its mindset.
And by privileging free speech absolutism, that's the implicit...
We basically killed two birds with one stone.
It's to say that we have free speech, therefore we are civilized. Therefore we are better. Therefore we are educated. All these kinds of words that are used to describe the Muslim minority is to say that they are worse than us because they don't believe the same things as us.
Exactly, and I just want to circle back around to what you said, and make the comparison again. I mean, like you said, no one would be defending it if it were, say, against black people,
Right.
if the
Or
cartoons
Jews.
Exactly.
If you colored...
It just happens to be a very convenient race for us to hate.
Well, their depictions of Muhammad are extremely offensive. If you colored him white, because the way that they draw him with the big hook nose and everything, if you colored him white, he'd look like a Jew. But because he's got brown skin, it's okay.
Interesting.
Do you have anything you want to add to this?
I think we can also make these assertions against them and, not feel as bad about it. Like, hey, we have free speech. Like, why can't you take a hit? Because we're in a position of privilege.
Of course.
Thank you. Yeah, where it doesn't hurt us.
Exactly.
It's not our religion that's being lampooned.
I don't think white people will ever be able to identify with the struggle of being depicted in a bad way. Like, we don't know what it's like to have, crude cartoons drawn about us. I mean, not to say that I'm not making the assertion that white people are better in any way. I'm just saying that people have less dirt on us, basically. Like, what can you say about white people? We can't identify and we can't relate to that struggle of being discriminated against. I mean, unless you count, quote-unquote reverse racism.
The worst things you can say about white people are privileged in some way. What are the worst kinds of white people? Hillbillies, right? Hillbillies still have it better than a lot of black people.
Exactly.
The worst of the whites still have it comparatively better than black people do in this country.
But basically, I'm saying we can't relate to that struggle because we've never been depicted badly in the media. We've never been hurt by anything.
Our badness is that we conquered an entire continent.
Yeah.
That's the white people's badness.
Exactly.
Well, and regardless of, whether the media does depict it that way or say it, it's not societally reinforced. So the blow has no punch behind it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just think about it the way that we talk about Indian casinos. Like, the Indians are really getting the white people back. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
They're carving a small percentage of our income off to try and support the preservation system the reservation system that white people established.
We pretty much didn't even give them a choice.
Hey, I know your reservations are in terrible condition, but you can have a casino.
I don't want to talk about Native Americans. I'm just going to get sad.
Yeah. I'm glad that we were able to draw historical parallels, though, between the Muslim minority in France. Okay, I'm really glad we touched on that. Okay, let's move on to our second one. This is related because I think it's covered in the same way. The government of Turkey has threatened Twitter if it doesn't censor a newspaper account in Turkey. The left-leaning Turkish newspaper Bergun is under attack because they're left-leaning, they criticize the government, and they published some reports that Turkish intelligence agency trucks were carrying weapons to rebels fighting in Syria. And what has happened...
And this was published on Twitter, this information?
And in this newspaper. And what the Turkish government has done is threatened Twitter to censor this newspaper account. And I wanted to get your perspective on that.
I mean, personally, I'm kind of opposed to it because I think that when it's your actions, like, why should you be able to conceal some of your actions, especially when they're on a world stage like that, going to another country internationally? So, it's a short take on it, but that's my first instinct.
I think this is another one of those questions, like, last time, it's not controversial enough to...
Well, then let me get your perspective on this, because I think you're right, because we all agree. Censorship of Twitter is bad.
Yeah.
All right, yay, we've agreed. Okay, but what I did a little background research, and what this newspaper said was that the government of Turkey, which is run by the Justice and Development Party, which is a conservative, right-wing, semi-Islamist party. And the way that it was covered in this news story that I read was to say that the conservative government opposes Twitter, right? And I think that these are thinly veiled euphemisms for Islamists oppose Twitter, right? And that's how I interpreted the story. So I think it's winding around in the same way that the stories are framed like this because it's East versus West. And I think that's important. We can cut this story out if you guys are not feeling it.
Yeah.
This third story is a criticism that I see a lot, which is that Americans are absolutely infatuated with terrorism. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I took screenshots of the front pages of a couple news sites. So I went to news.google.com and I went down to their world section. And you see here they have 5 stories, 4 of which are about terrorism.
Interesting.
I did the same thing. Then I went to CNN, their front page, their big first graphic is about terrorists. Mm-hmm. Then if you go over to their latest, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 top stories. ISIS, shark attacks.
Shots fired near Biden home.
Yes, but then a criticism of Fox News, and then a cop shot 4 times, no charges. So the point that I'm trying to make is that, boom, look at this. Terrorism is dominating their opening graphic and over on their latest. And then if you go to the world section, here it is again. You have the Pope on the left, and then you have 5 stories, and the top one is terror threat. What's the next target? The second one is about ISIS. The third one is about Boko Haram. And I say this because I think it's interesting the way that the press has chosen to cover world news is to say, look at all this terrorism.
Well, I think that the Boko Haram story merits being up there. I agree that, if you took that out, it would still be extremely terrorist focused. And I guess I think it's a good point. Again, reinforcing, our hatred against Muslims as a country.
And what also gets to me is the way that repeatedly, and this is a criticism, it's been repeated a bunch of times, I know I'm repeating it too, is to say that the world has never actually been safer. The world is the safest now than it's ever been. There's less violence, comparatively, than any other part of history. And yet, our world news sections are dominated by acts of violence. And I think it's important. Your point about Boko Haram is important. Of course, these stories are relevant to world news. To dismiss them as irrelevant is to miss the point. Is that we only have so much attention. We only have so much mental bandwidth. But to make things worse, when it's consumed, like on these front pages, with stories about terrorism, what are the opinions we form about the world? That everywhere else is
less civilized.
Less civilized, exactly.
Yes.
And I wanna think. Do you think that's a good assertion, or do you think I'm missing the point? Bonnie, you haven't said anything.
Well, that's because this question, kind of like the last one, like, of course I agree with you. I mean, there's not a whole lot I can elaborate. Yes, I mean, I already touched on the fact that I believe that America has something to gain from sort of exaggerating, perhaps, the violence that takes place, particularly against quote-unquote innocents or countries that we're allies with. I don't know. I mean, I would have to read the news articles. Obviously, I don't know what countries these took place in.
I guess my follow-up
but-
question then
Yeah.
is, it's related to what you said. It's to say,
Yeah.
who benefits? Because,
Well, Americans do, because it makes our hatred more convenient, because when we hear terrorists, we think
Right.
Muslim, and we're very, very comfortable being anti-Muslim.
But I'm thinking
and anything
about-
we can do to reinforce and justify that, of course, we're going to shoot for.
right, so you're saying that the press coverage somehow speaks to an already existing ideology, and that's why they put these stories up, is to play to that.
Well, media has an agenda. I mean, that's not... I mean, there's
Sure.
no debating that.
Right.
There's
what I write
There's
about.
no
That's
such
my
thing as a
research.
neutral news story with no political motive behind it. I mean...
But I guess my question then is, these are not political in the strictest sense, right? We don't have government-run news agencies like other countries do. So, do they stand to gain in the same way that you're saying that there's a political gain? Or is it ideological? Or does it have something to do with capitalism? Because I think it's all of those things.
Homie, you are lying to yourself if you think that these news organizations are not government-owned. I mean, where do you think they get their
Comparatively.
money from? I mean, without funding
Comparatively.
and, yeah...
Right. I'm as big a critic of the mainstream press as you'll ever meet, right? But my point is to say that the politicians don't write the news stories
Right,
exactly.
right.
They certainly have a large influence. They certainly have a lot of power in this. But I'm thinking, what are the benefits that are gained by a story like this? And I think you make a good point, is that it speaks to our ideology. It speaks to the war of civilizations. It speaks to the comparisons that are made between the East and the West. But I'm thinking specifically, what is it about terrorism that gets to us? Why aren't we reporting about the inner governmental workings of governments we disagree with, right? Why isn't Iran or Syria, their governments, the top stories? Why is it terrorism? My idea is that terrorism is particularly dangerous because, supposedly, all people can be affected by it. It's faceless. It's quick. You don't know where they are at any time, right? That terrorists supposedly can affect every single person in the world. Who protects us from terrorists?
Military.
The military, the government. All these politicians are like, I am hard on terrorism. The Democrats are soft on terrorism. I am hard on terrorism, right? Every politician is hard on terrorism. If there was ever a terrorist attack in this country under the leadership of the Democrats, they would not win the next presidential election. That is absolutely true. If another 9/11 happened, do you think Obama could have been reelected? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are no politicians who are soft on terrorism. But the idea is that the more we are afraid of terrorism, it teaches us to be complacent about those in power, because they are the ones who we trust to protect us. That's what I think the ideological implications of focusing on terrorism are. And that's a critique. I'm not plagiarizing it, but it's certainly something that's been in my head recently.
It's not an original thought.
Yeah, none of what
Not
I'm
that
saying
there
is
is
original.
such a thing.
Right. But I did the same thing when I was talking about, when I did my research paper on the Columbine shooting, right? Is the Columbine shooting dominated headlines because Columbine could happen to anyone. It could happen anywhere in the country. It was so scary because these kids had invaded a place that we expect to be safe, right? They were in the suburbs, they were affluent, they were white, and yet they were still violent. Why was that? They were acting like inner city kids, right? That was the argument that I made.
I think it's also really interesting that when we do have these instances where we have, white, possibly affluent, like middle class type shooters, we always give them the excuse of mental illness.
Oh, of course, yeah, yeah.
And I think it's really, important that that never happens when it's a black person who's committed the shooting.
What about a
Well,
terrorist?
it's a barrier. It's
right?
a way of separating ourselves. It's saying, oh no, this is not credible. This is not
not normal.
applied to the
This is- yeah,
rest
this
of us.
is
This
not the
not
norm.
normal. It's just
Exactly.
a way of distancing ourselves from it.
Think about the huge cracks of what we would call white society if we admitted that those shooters were like everybody else. Imagine that. And they were. That was the problem. They had good parents. They came from good home. I can't say they were good parents, but I'm saying that they came from good homes, stable family situations. They lived in an upper class suburb outside of Denver, right? That's the idea, is that if we are to believe that this is something normal, we have to also admit the problems of our own society. And so when we separate them, we blame something else. Do you ever notice that terrorists are never mentally ill? Mm-hmm. Perhaps unstable, certainly barbarous, never mentally unhealthy, always very rational.
That's the point I was trying to raise, yep.
What is the rationality of terrorism then, right? We have to be able to claim that they make the rational decision to attack us. Mm-hmm. Because if they don't, if there's something wrong with them, then we can dismiss it. But they attack us because they think there's something wrong with us. We get to defend ourselves if they attack us first. Oh my god, I'm having so much fun. All right, let's do it.
Lightning round.
So I need 5 numbers between 1 and 30.
Don't pick one. It's not relevant to us. I already
5 numbers between 2 and 30.
3, 21,
18.
18?
17. 17,
okay. Bonnie,
first I reject your bread, now I reject your number.
This is not your lightning round. Okay, we've got 3, 21, 17.
9.
9.
Just because of the 3, 9. It's divisible by 3.
There you go. And so is 21.
Oh, 17 screwed it up.
Oh, well, 17 is just 14 plus 3, so there you go. Okay, and one more.
12.
12. All right.
Lightning round.
Question number 3. Your plane crashes and you get stranded on a deserted island with only one movie on your iPad. What movie did you just download?
I'm trying to think of like the longest movie out there that I still like.
Gandhi.
I mean, The Hobbit is a movie that's divided into 3 parts. So do I get all the parts or just one part?
You can have all 3 parts. You bought the first 2 and you pirated the third one.
I'll take The Hobbit.
Okay, The Hobbit. Excellent answer.
Lightning round.
21. Who is your favorite artist in the broadest sense of the term?
Tough questions. I'm assuming artists wouldn't include like writers.
No, of course it does. In the broadest sense, somebody who creates something. Painters, musicians, writers, poets, architects,
lawmakers.
Okay.
Influential politicians.
You've gone way too far.
The art of political
the broadest
reform.
sense of the term, Lindsay.
I didn't say evil, I said artists. Sorry.
Words mean things in the broadest sense. Come on.
Who's your favorite?
This is a really hard question. I really like Tolstoy. But I haven't read much by him, so I'm like hesitant to say that because I feel like I should be better informed.
What have you read from him? I mean, if you don't have to say favorite, but somebody you really enjoy. What is some Tolstoy that you have read?
Anna Karenina is my favorite book out there.
Like ever written?
Yeah.
Okay.
That I've read.
Okay.
Significantly lowers the sample size.
That's true.
There.
That's true. Nice.
Lightning round.
Question 17. Oh, this is my favorite question.
Oh, great.
You are forced to participate in a gladiatorial Hunger Games scenario. You get to choose one melee or projectile weapon to start the contest. What do you choose?
A projectile weapon like a gun?
No, like a bow and arrow or a crossbow. Or a spear.
Yeah, I'm kind of between axe and bow. I'm tempted to choose bow because after you throw your axe, you kind of have to run and get it. But I took a college class in which they taught us to throw axes, and I really liked it.
Was it the Monsters We Make?
It was.
I also learned to throw axes in the Monsters We Make. Okay, so you choose axe, or you choose bow?
I think I'm going to choose bow just because of the practicality.
Okay.
And I have hit a target once or twice with a bow, so.
Nice. Okay.
Lightning round.
Next question, number 9. Your iPhone breaks, and you have to get a new one. What is the first app you install?
I'm trying to think of the first one I installed on, because I just got an iPhone for the first time. And I'm trying to think of what the first app I installed was. I feel like it might have been the ESPN soccer app. I don't know if that's the first one I would install. I think it might be Spotify.
Spotify, okay. Not a bad choice. Spotify's pretty good. ESPN soccer app, though. I mean, you gotta be updated. Mm-hmm. Who's your team?
I'm really bad about following soccer when it's not just like different country teams playing each other.
Well, who's your national team that you pull for, besides the United States? Because there's only one right answer. It's the United States.
People got so mad at me during the last World Cup because I'd be like, what team are you rooting for? And they'd be like, United States. And I was like, yeah, but after we lose, like, who are you gonna
Nice.
Do you cheer for Chile because you live there?
I do. They were so close in this last World Cup. They played great. and Brazil's goalpost saved them in
Yeah.
penalty kicks. It wasn't
Yeah.
even the keeper. I was very distraught.
Off the post.
Lightning round.
Number 12. This is a weird one. Skyrim or Borderlands?
You know, I can't say I've played either of those.
Okay, then
Skyrim
we'll-
has good music.
That's true.
So-
Okay, let's pick a different one. Let's go to number 14. What is your favorite kind of animal, and why is it cats?
Kind of animal is kind of interesting to me. It's not what is your favorite animal, it's what is your favorite kind of animal. So are you suggesting families or genre?
Well, again, this speaks more to me because I wrote these questions. When I think what is your favorite kind of animal, I just say cat because I like big cats, I like small cats, I like house cats, I like barn cats, I like cats that will eat your face. I like all kinds of cats. I'm kind of weird like that. But I guess, okay, so we'll narrow it down. I'll rewrite these questions. What is your favorite animal and why?
Well, I kind of want to go in the broader sense of the term now.
Oh, please.
I really like birds. And I think it's part of the evolutionary thing. Like, I love how they look kind of reptilian. And, like, chickens, I love chickens. I have so many pictures of them, and I always show them to people, and they're like, that's not even cute. Like, it looks really reptilian. And I'm like, but it's a chicken, and it's... Yeah.
Chickens
Okay.
are awesome.
Well, I mean,
We're gonna get chickens.
are we?
Yeah, I'm gonna eat the eggs.
Oh, no.
Yes.
That offends my delicate vegan sensibilities.
I don't care. I have no ethical issue with eating eggs from chickens that are happy and healthy and raised in a loving chicken coop with all of their little chicken friends. I'll give them
Nice
straw
little
to keep
yard
warm.
to go out and
Yeah,
peck in.
yeah, I'll keep them warm in the winter. I'll put a heater in there. I'll put like misters in the summer. It'll be nice.
No, we
You'll
should
like
bring
it.
them inside during the winter.
No.
I wouldn't.
Have you
lea-
ever smelled a chicken?
I would not let you leave a chicken outside in the winter.
There's no dust for them to take a bath in here. They wouldn't be happy.
Yeah. They'd get greasy.
Hey, greasy chicken. That's the best kind of chicken, right? That's the lightning round. Let's move on to recommendations. So, is there like a new album, a show, a TV show, a movie, an article you read that you're really up on and you think other people should participate with, consume?
I don't know. Going outside more, maybe?
Oh,
That's really
okay.
lame.
No.
Really lame.
Recommend it. Recommend going outside. Just do it right in the microphone.
Go outside.
There you go. All right. Bonnie, what is your recommendation that you would give to our podcast listeners?
Definitely The Machinist on Netflix. Great movie. Really liked it.
Yeah, we just I just
Yeah.
rewatched it and you watched it for the first time.
Psychological thriller. It's like a less well-known Fight Club. It's like Fight Club's like cool indie cousin.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a cool way to describe it. My recommendation this week is you should go look up a local Las Vegas band called We Can Be Trees, and they just released a new song called Annapurna. I will put the link in the description, and you can download it from their Bandcamp. They're an awesome local band. They're made up of a couple friends of mine, and they're very exciting, and I really enjoy listening to them. That's the podcast this week. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time. Have a nice day.